Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to session 3 of Welcoming Newcomer Families. This is a 10-hour session series on welcoming newcomer families. It provides a very holistic outlook on the different types of categories that comes with this sort of work. It's supposed to be interactive, integrative, and the last week we went through topics such as accessing resources and getting to know families. We'll do a little bit of a review of that later for new folks that are coming in. But for this session particularly, we are going to be talking about partnering with communities, what that looks like in the newcomer family space, and what strategies we can utilize to really make this happen for everybody. So if I am going a little fast, if you want me to slow down, repeat a point, feel free to let me know. I see a couple of familiar faces from the last week. Hello, so nice to see everybody again. And I see a couple of new faces, so I'm excited to get to know everybody a little bit better. This is supposed to be a smaller discussion within a series so that folks can get to know each other. There's going to be space for people to network, and just to really discuss what things are working for you, what things you want to improve on in your district, and really understand the context behind what is happening in every district because all of our experiences are so different. But moving onwards, I am going to begin with a brief introduction to myself, as well as FCSN, and I would love to hear more from you as well. So hello, everybody, again. My name is Ann Tang. I am a senior trainer and family engagement manager with the Federation for Children with Special Needs, FCSN. I am a person with medium-ish black hair, glasses. My Zoom screen currently is blurred, and I am smiling very hard at you right now. FCSN is an umbrella organization that works with a lot of engaging and empowerment initiatives for families, especially those with children with disabilities. And over time, we have come to expand our work on family engagement to multilingual speakers, newcomer families, and that's really where my work comes in. I would love to hear from some folks in the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself and share something, I would love to hear from you on, firstly, your name, your title, secondly, your school district and what community you're coming from today, and lastly, your experience with newcomers, whether that be personally or just within your district. See a lot of folks that I've heard from in the last couple times, and I'd love to hear from you again if you have anything extra that you'd like to share, any updates on your end, or if there's anybody that's new to the sessions today, I'd love to hear from you as well. I'm going to open the floor up and stop talking.
I'd be happy to go since I'm new here. Hi, thanks for having us, everybody. Deanna, thanks for inviting me. My name's Jazz Marie Williams. I am an education advocate at Community Legal Aid in our Worcester office. So I guess my school district would be Worcester and also my community. As far as my experience with newcomers, I was a former special education teacher. So students rotated in and out. I was in an urban district. And so we saw a lot of, immigrant families come in. We saw a lot of students transitioning in and out, especially in the special education space, because I taught both in inclusion classes and in small groups. So I would have students come in and out of that. And with that, I really tried to make sure my options are as vast as possible. Like right now I'm learning ASL, American Sign Language, because I really want to make sure that one of the things I'm doing is, being as inclusive as possible for as many people as possible. So thanks for having us.
No, thank you for coming. I'm so excited to hear that. And it's so cool that you're incorporating ASL into your work. That's amazing. I see in the chat that Deanna said hi. Hello, so good to see you
Hi,
here.
Anne. Yeah, and I can actually introduce myself. It's great to see you, Anne. I know Anne from a different context, so it's great to see you here in this
So good to see
world.
you.
I'm Deanna Santiago from Mass Advocates for Children, and I am an education and disability rights attorney and leading Max project focused on advancing the education rights of immigrant and multilingual students. So, and I just learned something about Jazz Marie too. I had no idea that you used to be a special educator, so I'm excited to hear that. But so that's kind of the context in which I work with newly arrived families and newcomer students and navigating a brand new education system with, a lot of the barriers that are kind of listed out on this slide are kind of front and center every day to what we do. So thanks for hosting the webinar.
Yeah, and thank you for being here. I'm so excited to see you.
Yeah, no, likewise.
Yeah, is there anybody else that would like to share their work, their experience with newcomers, or just to introduce themselves?
Sure, I can go. Hi everyone, my name is Boyang. I'm an education advocate at the Children's Law Center. I also came because I saw Deanna's email in the coalition, so I was like, that's very exciting. So thank you for arranging this. Our agency is based in Lynn, but we take cases like primarily from northeastern Massachusetts. So that like my community can be Lynn and a little bit like in Salem, just pretty much everywhere in Essex County. We also have an immigration unit in our office, so I know a lot of newcomers are coming to them, but actually, I'm not seeing a lot of newcomers coming to our education unit. So I'm also here to like just hear everyone else situation and see how things are going, especially like education wise in other districts. So yeah, very glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us. So excited to be able to share this topic with everybody. This is something that really varies widely among school districts. So for the folks that have been here from the first session over to this one, we've been talking a lot about different experiences, not only with the, welcoming folks into our districts and our communities, but also what does it mean to register folks into the education system, and how does that intersect with working on healthcare resources for folks, and how does that pertain to English learning. So we've dealt with a lot of discussion on these issues, but in this section particularly, we're going to be talking about community. We're going to speak briefly about the belonging diagram, which is a very helpful way to kind of, contain where we are and pinpoint what strategies we can still use, and where we are in terms of holistically helping folks integrate into the community. And we're going to be doing some discussion as well. So happy to see everybody. I'm gonna, for the sake of time, move on, but feel free, as always, to leave your introductions, your contact information in the chat. I'm going to be saving the chat as well. So if there's any like important information that you'd like for folks to know or that you'd like to share around in this circle, feel free to do so. And I see a couple of texts. Hi, Regina. Good to see you. Yes, I remember seeing you last time as well. So great to see you again. And thank you for introducing yourself in the chat. I'm going to move on and give everybody a brief overview of what the agenda looks like and how these sessions go, especially for folks that are just coming in. So this series is particularly targeted for school district partners. And what that means is really we've been partnering with DESE on FCSN side to give this information out for schools that have emergency shelters. But because this information is so needed, we are trying to really get this going in terms of outreach and make it more widespread. So if you know any school district partners that you are working with that may benefit from this information, or are just curious and want to learn more about the space of newcomer families, feel free to direct them our way. My email was in the slide before that. If you are here in the session, I'm able to send a collective review of what we went through to you again, so you can get all this information. But because it is 2 hours long every time, it collectively becomes a 10-hour session. And within the 10 hours, you can earn PDP credits if you work as an educator. So we also know that this time may be difficult for people to come to, especially if it clashes with dismissal. And in order to kind of remedy that, before this, we were doing 2 to 4 meetings. We have since, in a vote, moved it to 1 to 3. In the last half hour of our meetings, we are able to get together and do some asynchronous work. So if you have to leave for dismissal, you're more than welcome to do so. Everything is recorded, but we do have that half hour asynchronous work time for folks to just kind of connect, speak to me and any FCSN folks that are in the conversation as well, or just work on the handouts that I sent a little bit earlier. If you did not receive the handouts, it means that perhaps you registered maybe yesterday or just today, and I'm able to send that to you when we're getting to our asynchronous work time. So stay tuned for that. But in terms of the actual contents that we're going today and in the next 1.5 hours, we're going to be doing a review on the Newcomer online forum that we introduced in the last session, as well as a brief glossary of terms, different types of context that we went through in the first session. We're going to go into the intersection of community and school engagement and what that looks like in terms of family engagement. And from there, we're going to narrow it down to strategies that are helpful in terms of really uniting schools, families, and communities. And then we're going to go into a discussion on community resources and then break down what partnerships and newcomer engagement looks like. So we have a very full schedule today. If we don't happen to get to all of the agenda items today, no worries. We'll just move it over to the next session on Thursday, same time from 1 to 3 p.m. There's session 4 on Thursday, and then there's also session 5. Session 4 is primarily targeting what cultural brokering looks like in the context of newcomer families. What can we do to create a more inclusive and welcoming climate that is culturally sustainable? And then in our last session, session 5 on next Tuesday, we're going to be delving deeper into an interactive activity, forming short-term plans as well as long-term plans so that everybody that comes, especially those in school districts, walks out with an action item to do, and we can just, congregate that information elsewhere as well. So I'm going to stop here because I just gave you a lot of information. Do we have any questions so far about the agenda? Okay. I see folks networking and explaining what they're doing in the chat. Thank you so much for making it interactive. I don't see any questions so far about the agenda, so I'm going to be moving on. Okay. So what you see on the slide is a diagram that we call the belonging diagram. It is a 4-way Venn diagram that goes through 4 milestones that we'll be going through in a clockwise fashion in a little bit. But what this diagram does is that it provides a space for folks to really pinpoint, as I mentioned before, where their strategies are at and what maybe they're missing so far in terms of welcoming folks into their community, especially in the context of newcomer families. We first start off with understanding context as the first milestone on the very top. In terms of understanding context, this can mean a very wide variety of things, such as understanding the refugee resettlement process, which we went through in session 1, what types of terminology that folks, especially in the educational system, use to identify newcomer families coming into the fold, other ways of supporting newcomer families, where to find resources on a glossary of terminology, as well as a little bit of a deep dive into statistics from public records, both state and federal, on the demographics of folks coming into the country, and particularly in Massachusetts. So all of this really pertains to understanding context. It is important to know because it really demonstrates our willingness to envelop folks coming into the fold, our understanding of what it means to be a newcomer in this country and knowing the context is very beneficial to the rest of the milestones below. I'm going to move clockwise again to accessing basic needs as the second milestone. There is a house icon on it, and it is to the right. I'm trying to be as descriptive about the imagery as I possibly can, but if you find it to be lacking, please let me know, and please remind me if I forget to describe anything visually. But back to accessing basic needs, this pertains to basic services, which we are launching at FCSN through an online forum for folks to sign up and talk to each other about, called also the Welcoming Newcomer Families Forum. This is done through the LMS Learn Worlds. We're going to go through that a little bit later so we can really catch folks up to what we talked about in session 2. But in terms of accessing basic needs, that means, English learning resources, housing resources, healthcare, as well as other types of basic needs within the classroom itself. Technology is also a really big one, but that's really what we mean by, the milestone of accessing all of these things together to create a more thorough and more comfortable process for folks to get settled into the community. To the very bottom, you'll find another milestone called Respecting Language and Culture, and this pertains to what we call a culturally sustaining support and initiatives that we can find not only throughout state and federal resources, but also within our own communities. What it looks like to be bringing in cultural brokers, translators, and interpreters into the fold. And we'll be going through this a lot more in detail in our next session on Thursday. Lastly, we have partnering with communities as the very last milestone, and this is really something that we want to integrate into every aspect of welcoming newcomer families. This not only helps to level the power dynamic that newcomer families and ourselves feel when we're interacting and communicating with each other, but it also helps create a more integrative look at what newcomer families need, how to create a sense of belonging, not only within the school itself, but also outside of that. And that's what we're going to be centering in on today. You will see on the diagram as well that there are arrows pointing towards the intersections of each Venn diagram circle. There are a couple of examples of how these milestones interact with each other. There are definitely more ways in this, but this is a basic understanding of how we can really play around with these milestones and understand more about how to utilize them. I'm going to give a couple examples from the diagram right now. The first one is that by intersecting understanding context as a milestone, as well as accessing basic needs, we then can think about the knowledge of immigration background to inform the provision of basic services and regulations. What that means for folks, why some folks may fear some resources or may lack some resources, and understanding holistically what that means, not only for the student, but also for the family. Another one that I'd like to point out is the intersection of partnering with communities and respecting language and culture. And this is, like when we're thinking about this, it's a very simple idea of partnering with our communities in order to provide this culturally sustaining support. That can mean looking into places after having an full understanding of context where some newcomer demographics that you're interacting with might feel most comfortable, some community resources that they naturally gravitate towards, such as faith-based institutions, and moving from there to partner with specific communities in order to both respect language and culture from the newcomers' terms, but also to access resources from places as they are most comfortable in. So from here on, I'm going to stop sharing this PowerPoint so that I can show everybody what this Learn Worlds LMS online forum looks like and what we mean by it. This is also a really great time to sign up for it if you have not yet. We're aiming to make the space a really great and safe and centralized area for folks to consolidate resources And you will know what I mean when I share it in a hot second. I'm going to put the link in the chat for folks to access. Here we go. And I am going to share my screen once again so that we are focused on the LMS. Okay, can folks see this okay? Can you give me a not a heads up, a thumbs up if you see it? See a couple of thumbs up. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. But welcome to the FCSN's Welcoming Newcomer Families online forum. This is a space for educators to discuss and share resources on how to welcome newcomer families to school districts. If you look at this homepage, you'll see that you'll need to sign in order to access this. And this is because it acts also as a centralized space for folks to socialize. So because of the social media widgets embedded into this website, you'll need to sign in and have a profile for free. But that's how we're able to identify folks that are coming in, how you'll be able to contact other people if you want to ask them any specific questions. But this over here is a more detailed explanation of the belonging diagram. If you ever want to refer anybody to this, I'm going to scroll down to the sections of this LMS. In this website, you'll find six sections full of resources. The last one is purely a space for feedback. If you have any anonymous feedback, you're also welcome to submit it as well. But on the first section, you'll find that there is a category called Assessing Belonging. This is where you will find federal toolkits and guides, as well as state resources on family engagement. All of these resources are not exhaustive and they are live, meaning that whenever we find another one, we will be implementing it into this website. So if you have any resources on hand that you want to see on this website to share with other folks, please don't hesitate to email me or email FCSN in general. They'll direct you to me so that I can put everything into this website for everybody to take a look at together. But this is, again, not exhaustive. You'll see that there are different areas for folks to just kind of dive in, talk to each other, and look for more information. The second category is called Understanding Context, named after one of the milestones and also our first session from last Tuesday. You'll find a glossary of terms as well as a YouTube video that's very comprehensive, easy to understand. You can play it in classrooms, you can play it for any of your colleagues on the refugee resettlement process so that folks have a better understanding of what newcomer families go through when they enter the States. Thirdly, there is a brief area on demographics. Everything is hyperlinked, so if you want to learn more about certain statistics or demographics of folks coming into the countries as well as Massachusetts, that is a really great place to start. Thirdly, in this category, you'll find basic information on accessing basic needs such as healthcare, food, and English learning. We're trying to make this as relative to particular communities region-wide as possible, but because it is so difficult to consolidate this information when folks are going through very different experiences in their school districts, this is really where we would love for you to, let us know what you're experiencing so we can help make this more specific and pinpointed towards your needs. The last two over here are respecting language and culture as well as partnering with communities. These are coming out during our sessions, so you'll be seeing the partnering with communities section come out right after this session. There's going to be some tips and strategies in there for forming community partnerships, as well as some resources for you to cite and also to look into, such as books, if you want to learn more and get more into detail, because there's simply not enough time to go through everything within the span of an hour and a half. But the same can be said for respecting language and culture. We're going to be going over accessibility for newcomer families in terms of language access, physical and technological access, and how that all relates back to culture and climate. So I'm going to just click into one of these so you can take a look at how it's structured, but each page has the same format. clicked in. You'll see that there is a path for folks to go in and click into anything that they want to see. It's pretty easy to navigate once you get into the system. Everything, again, is hyperlinked. There are a couple of prompts here for you to interact with other people on. And over here is a widget for social media so that you can go in, ask questions, share images, type in a message or just a statement, even create polls if you want to learn more about the community. But so far, we have a couple of learners that have signed up in the last session. We would love to have more folks come in and discuss this so that we can really create a big and open space for folks to consolidate this information. There are also spaces here for you to highlight anything you want to highlight and create comments, or also type in here anything. And this is something that other people can see once they log in as well. But you'll see my profile here. I am a staff member. So if you click on my profile, you'll be able to contact me directly as well through Learn Worlds, but you can also as well email me. I'm available in every form of communication possible to you. Okay, I am going to stop talking now to allow there some space for any questions about Learn Worlds and also this online forum. I know that was a lot of information to go through, but I'm just going to stop for a second, pause, and let folks ask any questions. Okay, it seems like everybody is set and all good to go. So I am going to go back to the presentation. If you would like for me to explain this more in detail, I can do so later as well. But in the future, please keep an eye out for FCSN's tutorial on this Welcoming Newcomer Families online forum. We're going to be doing like a more in-depth explanation of everything, go through contents with folks, and have there be like an interactive space for folks to ask questions and discuss what needs to be put in this consolidated area for information as well. So keep an eye out for that. It should be coming in around 2 weeks. But I'm going to stop sharing here, go back to the presentation. And by this point, we have really gone through a pretty comprehensive review of what we've discussed in the last 2 sessions. There are recordings of each session. As I've mentioned, they will be available on YouTube. So if you know anybody that just wants to get a hold of this information, feel free to send it to them as well after we upload everything. But for now, just let them know that this is available for PDP credits if you know anybody that would like to do this. So feel free to email me with any questions because we're already on session 3 if there are folks that want to just jump in the middle and we can make something happen. Okay. The last link that I also haven't mentioned yet is that we are doing a Jamboard discussion in every session. All of these links are hyperlinks, so once you receive the presentation slides, you can go into these links, such as the Jamboard links, to view all of the information that we've discussed prior. A lot of districts like to keep their names, either their full name or just a district name on the notes of the Jamboard so that we can follow up with folks. And if you would like to do so in the next discussion later today, you are more than welcome to. We love to hear from you. Okay, moving onwards. Okay, I'm going to go through this very briefly because this is something that we kind of ran out of time for last time. But while we were talking about accessing basic needs and resources in our last session on Thursday, we went through a little bit about what it means in terms of language and accessibility. In terms of legal, what is legally available for folks, for newcomer folks to be protected in the systems, we went through Plyler v. Doe, which states that regardless of whether a student or a family has official paperwork, such as birth certificates, they are always eligible for public education. So this is something that is really good to know in the back of your mind. If you know anybody that is struggling with producing public official paperwork for any services related to education. But aside from that, I also want to point out that Law v. Nichols from 1974 notes that students that are not proficient in English must be able to participate meaningfully in educational programs and services, and that programs receiving federal financial assistance, such as public schools, do have legal obligations under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to prohibit discrimination for learning based on race, color, and national origin. And this has led also to the Equal Education Opportunities Act of the same year, in that public schools must take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation by students in their instructional programs. We will be going through a little bit of how to do this in this section, and particularly the next when we talk about cultural brokering and language access, but I just wanted to point this out now. It is an important piece of the milestones that we were sharing in the belonging diagram before. And I think this is just also helpful information and context to know in the back of our brains as we head onwards towards strategies to help partner with communities. Something else that we noted before is that we communicate when we're communicating with newcomer families, particularly those that are English learners, is that we're communicating for understanding. A really great way to do so is to utilize translanguaging. And this is something that, to make sure that everybody is on the same page, this is something that really focuses on not just effective communication, but integrative communication, in that if we're speaking to a multi-language learner, we're welcoming the integration of all languages during a communication, regardless of whether a sentence is fully English or perhaps fully Chinese, fully Spanish, and such. This is something that is useful to know in terms of cultural brokering, as well as language access, translations, and interpretation. We also want to really use images to supplement written communication, particularly when it comes to three-way communication between the community, the school, and also our newcomer families. We also want to use plain language to really emphasize no jargon or acronyms as much as we possibly can, so that we are able to notice and avoid anything that might be different in another language when there are translations or interpretations that might be a little bit different from the original acronym. For example, one of my colleagues has brought up to me previously that the acronym for IEP in Portuguese is PEI, and this creates a lot of confusion when it comes to families trying to understand what acronym is what. So writing out the full language for any kind of communication between communities and families is going to be really critical in order for families to understand what the acronym means, and what it means when it's fully translated. I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this is when we're going to be going in more fully into the intersection of community and school engagement. I want to stop here and really think about what family engagement is for everybody, so that, again, we are all on the same page, but also we have a couple of key words and phrasing to really think about when we're thinking about the strategies that we want to utilize. So a really great quote that I wanted to share with everybody is the one on the slide. It is from the Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and the Transformation of Schools from 2020. And it says, culturally responsive, sustaining family engagement is the practice of authentic, equal partnership with families, rooted in a deep knowledge and appreciation for the rich social and cultural identities, assets, habits, and contexts that families bring to learning. And something that is really important when we're thinking about this quote is the usage of culturally responsive sustaining. What we really want to focus on is culturally sustaining. How can we create ways for families to access the information and communication styles that we want to share with them in a sustainable manner, regardless of whether newcomer families in your districts come and go? How can we make sure that everything is culturally responsive at the same time when we're implementing these strategies and tips into what is already existing within our systems and our classrooms? Um, Before we move on, I'd like to just take a moment for folks to just kind of take all of this in. And I would love to hear from you in the chat one word from this quote that you really identify with. For me, I can give out an example first, but for me, one word that I really identify with in this quote is authentic. As an immigrant myself, having identified with many different types and identities of immigration, I really value authentic communication between the systems that we're being introduced to, as well as the folks that are running them. And I remember as a little kiddo being integrated into the school system, how difficult it was to find folks that really wanted to speak to me authentically on both my culture and how it pertains to the work that I do in trying to navigate the school systems. So for me, the word is authentic. Feel free to type the word into the chat. You can also speak up on it if you want, but I'm just going to leave a couple of minutes here for folks to just kind of trickle in a couple of words that you see and that you like from this quote. Okay, thank you, Barbara. I see appreciation for cultural and social identities. I see equal, appreciation. Authentic is so important for language development in the classrooms. I completely agree. Thank you for speaking up on this. I just think it's important to keep a couple of words in mind when we're talking about this work. And if there's anybody that'd like to say anything, I'll give maybe like 10 seconds for folks to speak up, and then we can move on from here. I see knowledge, equal, humble. Unfortunately, the oppressed becomes the oppressor. Unfortunately. And as well as appreciation. I also love that word, Leslie. Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody for sharing. I'm going to be moving on to the next slide. Okay. This is another quote that would be helpful for folks to know about. You may see it if you have attended other sessions of ours before regarding family engagement. But this is a quote from the book A New Wave of Evidence from 2002. It is written by Henderson and Mapp. And they are the creators of the dual engagement framework that you can search up that a lot of folks are pushing right now in terms of family engagement. If you have attended our February 15th session on partnering with immigrant families, you'll see that we referenced it a lot in our work as well. But I'm going to be reading this quote again so that everybody can just see visually and also hear it. When schools, families, and community groups work together to support learning, children tend to do better in school, stay in school longer, and like school more. When schools build partnerships with families that respond to their concerns and honor their contributions, they are successful in sustaining connections that are aimed at improving student achievement. I just wanted to point this out and put it out there so that we just know the context of the amount of research that has went into family engagement and how much work there is supporting your work in reaching out and engaging with newcomer families. Okay. Lastly, in terms of the intersection of community and school engagement, I'd like for everybody to take a look at this chart. It is titled Moving from Involvement to Engagement. So really thinking about what ways we can redirect our language and actions to center engagement as a core value of what we talk about in terms of communication with families. Couple of examples of how this wording can be changed is on the charts on the screen. To the left, you'll see the title Family Involvement, as well as 4 categories within it. To the right, you'll see Family Engagement and the responding 4 categories. So firstly, instead of doing to, we can always replace this with doing with. So really thinking about community partnership, not only just directing resources to a community to give to newcomer families, but really engaging in this dual partnership where we speak with community partners on how they also feel like it's best to engage in family partnering, and what that looks like, so that we're working on this together instead of just sending information other ways. And in this case, it creates sometimes more or less work depending on what a district already has. But in the long term, it is more sustainable because you build and forge that family partnership when you're doing with instead of doing to. And in this case, it creates a really great background and just basis and foundation for engaging with other newcomer families coming into the fold instead of just sending resources one by one whenever there's a new demographic or new wave of newcomer families coming into your district. So that is one example that I would like to share. There are a couple more on the slide, but in terms of time, I'd like to just kind of move on so that we're not restricted by any slides that we cannot get to before the end of the hour and a half that we have here today. So what I would like to introduce to everybody today, and the primary target of our topic on communicating and partnering with communities, are strategies that we can use to center the conversation, not just between schools and families, but between schools, families, and communities. These are very broad strategies. In terms of welcoming every family, creating the space for three-way communication instead of that dual two-way communication that we are usually very familiar with, sharing power, something that I've discussed before, in terms of leveling the power dynamics, making sure that the field is even for everybody involved, supporting student success and keeping this in mind when we're speaking to not only families and community partners, but also other colleagues that we have within our own districts. And this naturally leads to collaborating with our communities in terms of speaking for every child. But a really great example that I'd like to bring up again is examining where information is going and how to create opportunities for families to come to events that you are hosting. For example, we've mentioned this in session 1, in that not every family would be comfortable, especially if they are a newcomer family, not every family would be comfortable in approaching official buildings, such as school buildings, city halls, any sorts of centers like that. And one of the reasons why this is so is because of uncertainty within their own status. When folks are integrating and resettling into new communities, perhaps sometimes 1 or 2 family members or themselves may not have official paperwork. And because of that, it is very difficult for students and families to access information if usually events are hosted within schools themselves. So an example of how we can utilize all of these strategies to make sure that an event is accessible for families and that we really think about how welcoming this is for folks in terms of their cultural backgrounds and their needs is by assessing what types of communities they are most likely going to be a part of. For example, um, a wave of newcomer families from certain countries may be more inclined to visit faith-based institutions for supports. I know that when I was an immigrant coming into this country, what my family and a lot of my community utilized myself was the churches around us. Churches are very accessible, not only because they are a safe space for folks, but also because they are oftentimes bilingual, and it creates a really great center for community resources to be shared. So by speaking with community partners that people may not have historically been partnering with before, such as faith-based institutions, regardless of whether the district itself is faith-based, the school itself is faith-based, it's a great way to really consider the needs of the families, um, thinking about what safety concerns they have in mind, what types of resources they're most willing to gravitate towards, and what types of people that they're also most willing to gravitate towards. And by forging this community partnership, you are able to find a sustainable partner long term to really give this information to folks. And within faith-based institutions themselves, there are a lot of resources available for folks in terms of how to translate, how to interpret, and where to find additional community members and newcomer families that may not be very noticeable in official paperwork and official sites. So this is an example that I would like to bring up. Of course, not every community partner has to be faith-based. It's just one of the few examples that I think most folks tend not to possibly think about when they're thinking about how to reach out to communities. But if you have any other examples that you can think of in the chat, feel free to put them down and share with everybody that is here today. I'm going to be moving on to the next slide. This slide focuses on, again, schools, families, and community strategies, but it is in the context of a very specific book called Humanizing Education for Immigrant and Refugee Youth, 20 Strategies for the Classroom and Beyond. This is written by Monisha Bajaj, Daniel Walsh, Leslie Bartlett, as well as Gabriela Martinez. This is a really great book. I have a hardcover here. I refer to it all the time. I really cannot emphasize how important it has been for me to learn more about what strategies are available for folks, but also how to really expand my way of thinking when I'm thinking about community partnerships. But I'm going to be referencing a lot out of this book today as my main citation for any strategies that folks might want to use within their particular classrooms or districts. This book centers 3 categories of strategies for school district partners. The first one is called Classroom and Instructional Design. The second one is specifically for school design as a whole. And the last one is catered towards extracurricular programs and community and alum partnerships. I'm going to walk everybody through a couple of strategies for each category so that by the time we are done here today, we can go right into a discussion before going into asynchronous work time. But in terms of strategies for classroom and instructional design, we can utilize a lot of key terms that we've talked about in the last 3 sessions. The first one is utilizing translanguaging and English language development. I'm going to be speaking on this a little bit more because I think it's really important to really standardize the term translanguaging as something that we think about primarily in this newcomer space. But what that means is really it's a method and a strategy for strategically communicating effectively. And what that means is really thinking about the context, the types of languages that we're trying to access, and not just one standardized way of speaking. If folks are already utilizing this and their strategies for the classroom, that would be amazing. But one example of how you can utilize translanguaging and English language development is to create a space for folks to learn English within the context of different languages instead of just English by only speaking in English itself. Another strategy that I like to get over is honoring histories and heritages. Another one is practicing purposeful regrouping. incorporating differentiated instruction and universal design for learning, supporting students with limited and interrupted formal education, undertaking holistic and continuous assessment, as well as including advisory periods. And all of these strategies in this category really pertain to one main question, which is how do we support students to develop their bilingual identities instead of just integrating them into the educational system with the intent of utilizing and improving their English identity. What does it look like to embrace a multilingual take on what learning should look like? And how do we do that within our classrooms as well as our communications with partners and our families? So, this is the main question that these strategies for classrooms and instructional design want to offer. Um, we can go over them a little bit more in session 4. The reason why we're just going over them holistically right now is because we want everybody to think of ways to utilize these strategies for community partners. But in terms of how to do this in a culturally sustainable context, we'll be referring to session 4, where we're going to be talking more about climate and language access. I'm going to leave this open for another couple of seconds in case folks would want to screenshot this ahead of time if they want to compare it while I'm talking and while we're discussing later on. Okay, moving onwards, we're going to go into the second category. And these are categories, this category are strategies for school design. So I'm going to be reading over the list so that it's also visually and audibly accessible. The first one is enacting democratic school governance. Second strategy is adopting intentional staffing. Third one is integrating coaching for culturally responsive teaching. Fourth one is addressing school language policies. Fifth one is promoting a positive school climate and culture. Sixth is emphasizing students' health and wellness. And lastly, seventh is establishing dual enrollment in early college programs. And all of these really pertain to how we think about where we focus in on equitable outcomes for newcomer families and immigrant children within the school system. So how do we make sure that for example, in terms of intentional staffing, we really focus on folks that are able to connect with students not only through cultural similarities, but also through their experiences. And this is also a really great way to think about how we can utilize these strategies in terms of community partnering. If there is anybody that is available in the community that may be helpful in terms of knowing the language, knowing the context, to staff folks or to train folks in after school programs for kiddos, especially when there are a lot of newcomer children and students involved, that's a really great way of thinking about the community, wow, my brain just stopped working. Partnering with communities milestone and integrating that into the adopting intentional staffing strategy. The same can be said for addressing school language policies. For example, making sure that there are safe spaces for folks to utilize languages in their native tongue, or for folks to talk to each other or to introduce other types of languages within the classroom so that it's normalized for folks to be multilingual learners instead of just standardizing English. That can be a classroom policy, that can be a school policy or a district-wide policy. So those are a couple examples. But because each district is so different, I'm going to leave it for folks to examine, and also if we have time to ask me any questions about any of these strategies so that we can really design them and personalize them for your own districts. Lastly, the last category that I want to go through with everybody is strategies for school design. Oh my gosh, there we go. strategies for extracurricular programs and community and alum partnerships. Apologies if that made your head hurt, because it certainly did for me. I'm going to be reading off the list here for a couple of strategies that are going to be important in terms of this context. The first one is providing after-school and summer programming. The second one is involving families. Third one is offering legal services. And a lot of these you'll see are things that we've talked about in the last session regarding accessing basic resources. The fourth one is developing community partnerships for social support and civic engagement. The fifth one is implementing internships and career preparation programs, especially those in secondary schools. And the sixth one is engaging alum in schools and community building. And none of this is possible without relationship building and thinking about newcomer families coming into the fold with an asset-based mindset, so that when we're thinking about doing and utilizing these strategies into what is already existing within our own school districts, we can also think about it with the thought of what additional supports newcomer families are bringing for our school systems, instead of what additional support do we need to bring for newcomer families. All of these strategies as a whole acknowledge the different histories and cultures of schooling, and they also help folks really think of this context as becoming aware of the impacts of anti-immigrant rhetoric and policies. So by thinking about all of these strategies, we also think about the impacts of what it means to not have any policies and strategies in place for supporting newcomer families, and what that means socially for folks, and why it would also then result in a cycle of increasing the anti-immigrant rhetoric and also increasing the feeling of unwelcomeness that folks might be feeling when they're entering official places. I'm going to stop here for folks to ask any questions if there are any, because I know I just went through a lot of information. Again, feel free to screenshot. Hi, Leslie.
Hi, I just wanted to offer the concept that there are a lot of groups within a school community that can work with educators and administrators around welcoming new families, even if they don't speak the language. And sometimes a cultural group or a parent who has that experience of maybe being a newcomer can provide support to the district around strategies to reach out and involve the new families in the school community, even if they don't speak the language. And that goes to finding those cultural brokers or someone who can facilitate communication. But I know there are lots of families within a school community that could maybe step up. The invitation should go out to say, can anyone help us with new families? And you just don't know who they know. And if they couldn't do it, they might also know someone else within the community. I think that's where we're not using our community resources to the highest degree. Just a thought.
No, Leslie, that's such an important note to make. I really, really appreciate that point. And especially, I think what you're saying really, really relates back to how we're thinking about the dynamics between community partners, families, and schools, because sometimes the families themselves can be the community partners. I think that's really the point that we're lacking here, is that oftentimes if you have any CPACs or LPACs in your community, they're really great sources to reach out to folks, because they also uniformly act as a community partner. So thank you so much, Leslie. Is there anybody else that'd also like to share a point while we're discussing this? Hi.
Oh, hi. I'm also an immigrant, and I have been in, I believe, everybody's shoes. One of the things that I want to mention that is important is, even though we have ambassadors, cultural competence, that knows our culture, many times they are already, they already are acquainted with cultural values in this country. And newcomers, many times, whatever you are trying to teach them or give it to them doesn't make any sense. So it is important also to teach newcomers about, the different cultural, to help them integrate to this culture. Whatever we are talking to make sense for them, because as much as you provide services, as much as you tell them this is what is for you, it doesn't make sense for them, they're not going to take advantage of them. It's something, different values that we need to negotiate. We need to learn to negotiate what is good or what is bad. What I have learned back home makes sense or doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and thank you so much for bringing that up. That's a really great and important point to make. And that when we're thinking about what information is out there, also being able to think about it in an accessible way. Consuelo, is there anything else that you'd like to bring up? I see that your hand is also still raised. I don't know if I'm cutting you off or not. Okay, not cutting you off. Got it.
No. I'm sorry. I'm not good in technology. Lowering
Oh,
the hand.
no worries about it. I totally understand.
Yeah. No, I think, it's also important that we learn to assimilate to this culture. And to assimilate to this culture, we need to things that are work different, of course, work differently from our homes to here. And many times doesn't make sense. Even, it's very well known that my jokes in Spanish doesn't make any sense when we tell it in English. Or even vice versa, the jokes in English doesn't make any sense in Spanish. But at the same, whatever you do here in this country sometimes doesn't make any sense for us because we are not used to that. So we need to learn to, this is the way they do it in this country. We are not trying to impose you, but we are trying to make sure your son or your family is welcome here. And that's the way it works here. You understand? Because as much as I have tried myself, as much as I tell the parents this is the way it does, if I don't teach them this is the way it works in the United States, they're not going to do anything. And doesn't work. They make it worse. Doesn't work in anybody's favor. And everybody, because it doesn't work on their favor, everybody gets scared because it didn't work for them. And everybody knows that, this is not a good way. We don't trust the system. We don't trust the person. We don't trust the school. And, and everybody's panic. Thank you. Sorry. No more.
No, of course. And thank you so much for speaking up on that. I think that's really important for us to really think about, how to make sure that the information that we're giving out to folks is something that really teaches folks about the systems that they're going into. I know for my family personally, it took a very long time to get used to the systems, but it was only possible because my parents came into the country with a little bit of English, not a lot of English, but enough to really build on a foundation. And that is something that isn't always accessible for families, especially now when folks are coming in. So thank you for sharing. That's so helpful to think about. And let's move on actually now that we're speaking about all these to to more discussion. Give me 1 second while I figure out where my mouse is at. There we go. So I'd like to invite everybody by this point to go onto our Google Jamboard to discuss a little bit more about what community resources look like for you and when you can think of utilizing them. So on this Jamboard, I've put down 3 pages. Each page is separate for another category. Of all the strategies that we've talked about earlier, and the categories are listed on the slide right now: classroom and instructional design, school design, as well as extracurricular programs and community and alum partnerships, and what that looks like and what it could look like for your school district. This space is primarily for people to introduce themselves to each other, to talk about what they think is important, and for school districts to share anything that they would like to see or to ask for more information. So I'm going to be sharing this Google Jamboard link for everybody, and I will be organizing folks into different breakout rooms, as today we have a little bit more people than we did last time. Okay. I'm going to open up this room for folks for 10 minutes or so that we can all just kind of get to know each other, discuss. If we know that we need more time than 10 minutes and we want to extend it to 15, feel free to let me know. Um, and then afterwards, we're going to go into the closing and then go into asynchronous work. So this is the part where I'm going to pause the recording. If we are feeling that it's important to record down any of our discussions on the Jamboards later on, we can do so and restart the recording as well. I'm going to pause really quickly.